Hello, everyone. Welcome to DEI, a podcast dedicated to discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Kara Siet, and today with us we have Miss LaTricia Hill Chandler with us. Is that how you pronounce your name?
It's LaTricia.
LaTricia. LaTricia.
The phonics is right there on the Zoom screen, if that will help.
Oh, LaTricia Hill.
There you
What about
go.
the last name?
Hill Chandler. Hill hyphen Chandler.
Okay, Hill Chandler.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hill Chandler is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Southern Bancorp. With over 27 years of experience, Ms. LaTricia has led innovative DEI initiatives at Arvis Bank, Walmart, and Veolia North America. She's known for her groundbreaking work in developing inclusive leadership programs and pioneering diversity strategies at her various leadership positions. Ms. Hill Chandler has recently been announced as Top 50 Women Chief Diversity Officer by Women We Admire, recipient of the 2020 Women in Business from the Arkansas Business Journal, listed as one of the top women in banking by the Arkansas Business and Politics magazine, and was accoladed with the 2023 Women Trailblazer honoree by the National Association of University Women. Her work is truly inspirational. Ms. Hill Chandler, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your identity, and why you ventured into the field of DEI?
Sure. So my name is LaTricia Hill Chandler. I put the phonics there because people tend to either shy away from pronouncing it correctly or asking, or it's just to help people actually just recognize how the correct pronunciation is. I identify as she, her, hers. I am completely full of intersections. I am a Black woman, mother, educated with an undergraduate from an HBCU, historically Black college and university from Memphis, Tennessee, with a graduate degree from a liberal arts college in Indiana. I am a sister. I am currently a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, or Chief DEI Officer at Southern Bancorp, which is a CDFI. A CDFI is a community development financial institution. I have been in the work now almost 30 years in some capacity. And I live in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. So if you're familiar with the University of Arkansas Razorbacks, I'm near it. I'm also located where the headquarters of Walmart is. So that's where I live. Originally from Arkansas, but have lived in other parts of the world, particularly in the Midwest. I was there the longest in Indianapolis. So I'm back home to Arkansas.
Wow, sounds like a great adventure.
Yes.
Was your intersectionality what helped you realize and venture into the field of DEI?
Oh, yeah, because, it's really interesting, Kara, because I was excluded. That's what got me. So let's be very clear. That's what got me into the work of DEI. Early on in my career, I moved from the South to the Midwest. It was often the only person in the room that looked like me from a gender perspective, so woman, from an age or generational perspective, so the youngest person, from a race ethnicity perspective, I was the only Black. Educated, I probably was the most educated in the room, being that I had a master's degree as well. And I like to kid and say I was the only one in the room with red shoes on and red lipstick. I just say that because I was excluded in some of the conversations. And so all of those intersectionalities, I say, is one of the reasons why I was excluded out of the conversations, the ideas. No one wanted to know what I thought, but I was working for a company that clearly had an initiative to be diverse. And so that's what got me in the work. I felt the pain of what it felt like to be excluded. And so that feeling isn't a good feeling. And so I started to say, what do I need to do in order to make sure other people like me don't feel this way? And so that's how I got into DEI work.
So now, after like 27 years of DEI work, and with the current backlashes against the term DEI, can you
Yes.
tell us what this term means to you and what it means in your work?
So, yes, recently I just had a conversation this morning. I spoke to a group of interns that we have at Southern, and I they asked the same question, like, what is it about DEI now that is making it be the bad thing when it's intended to be a good thing? And so I believe, first of all, I believe they've politicized DEI so much and made it a political stint that people are forgetting what it really means. Um, I've seen it go from being identified from diversity just by representation, from race, ethnicity, and then you add gender, then you add age, and now you have the sexual orientation or sexual identity, and you have people with disabilities, and both seen and unseen disabilities, and people that are veterans. So I've seen the demographics change over time, and each time it changes, people are forgetting what DEI means as far as representation, as far as how does inclusion makes you feel like you belong, and more so equity. That's the big thing now, is moving from equality where everybody gets to start off at the same spot, but equity that says I may not, because of some systemic issues that I've had to deal with over time, or being marginalized, or identity issues. So I've seen it play out from being just about race and ethnicity now to now all those other attributes that have been added to now is back to about race and ethnicity as it relates to politics. And really it's all about just making sure everybody's perspective is being respected. So everybody's perspective is being respected, regardless of what your differences are. That's what DEI is.
Right. And how would you contrast it with the term privilege hire, which is starting to take root as a rebuttal term for DEI in recent years?
Yeah, privilege hire is a term I think that people are using um, to justify exclusion, right? I think privilege hire nowadays is back to that equality versus equity. There has to be some intentional efforts around being equitable. That's just how it is. You cannot, if you don't put in the work to make sure everybody is being treated fairly, then then there will be some exclusion. So let me give you an example. Um, when we start to talk about equity, there's so many ways to define what equity looks like. One of them could be equity in the pay gap. For every woman, every man makes more. I can't remember. It's on the tip of my tongue too. I want to say it's 84 cents maybe. Men make more than women. How do you bridge that gap? How do you make sure women are also being treated equitably, just as a man? Everybody get a paycheck, right? If you work for a company, but men are probably guaranteed to get more. How do you bridge the gap between titles? Women doing the same job as men, or younger people who just come into the workforce that are doing jobs same as the people who've been there for a while? How do you make sure that that gap is being filled? And so back to the privilege hire, when we start to talk about privilege hire, people are finding a way, again, to dehumanize simple things like just making sure everybody gets fairly treated through equity. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's becoming more and more of a term with a political skew to it.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
just as right now, how Vice President Kamala Harris is running for president right now, it is a moment and a movement, as we say, from the answer the call to Brat, to all the social media responding to her being the candidate. How do you feel about this moment in time?
Oh my, first of all, it's just amazing to have a woman even get the opportunity to compete. So we've come a long way from just getting the opportunity to just vote, but now we can run the vote because you're voting for a woman, right? So that alone is extremely amazing. But then to add on a Black woman in turn, to me is it's admirable. I admire that. I'm excited. I mean, because you do know girls rule the world, just saying.
For sure.
Girls run the world. So I think this is good to get a different perspective around some of the policies and then we just get it done. I'm just excited because back when I was a young girl, Kara, and I'm sure a lot of women can relate to this, particularly women of color. They used to tell us all the time, if you could see it, you could be it. And so to have her in this role, in this position, where other little girls, other young women, other people who are aspiring to be, an attorney general and a prosecuting attorney, like all the things, a vice president of the United States, this definitely allows them to confirm that they can too be it. So I'm just excited. I'm excited about it.
It's definitely a new wave and a new change.
It is a new change. It is a new change.
Jumping to your job and experience working for DEI, can you share the key objectives of your goal as Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Southern Bancorp? And how do you really measure the success of your DEI initiatives?
So there's a two-part for that. So an internal and an external. So internally, I want our impact, because that's the word that I'll use both for internal and external. So the internal impact is to help our employees get equitable, inclusive representation throughout the workplace and the workforce and those communities we serve. So promotion within, hiring within, underserved people, and what the impact it is to be inclusive and feel like they belong. And again, equitable practices. So equitable in pay, equitable in promotion, equitable in title. And then the second part of my role is the impact for those communities we serve. As a CDFI, our mission is to serve the unbanked, underbanked, low to moderate income families with an emphasis on Black and Brown communities. And so my role is to make sure that our policies support those efforts and to make sure we are being inclusive in our policies and practices to impact those underserved communities. So impact is the key word for my job, that it makes sure that we have a level playing field for both our employees and the communities we serve.
Um, do you have any specific measurements, or so do you report data, or do you have studies across time that evaluates the impact?
Sorry,
Sorry, take your time.
I'm
Take
getting
your
over
time.
the
Take your time.
Yes, we do have goals and measurements. So for example, let me give you an example of doing business with. So I'm sorry, I'm getting over a cold.
No, take your time. It's fine. I
Um,
totally get it.
the frog in my throat, you know how that is?
Yeah, I know.
The impact that we have in some of our communities also are around things like supplier diversity. So how do we make sure that we do business with small minority and women-owned businesses as well? So when we have opportunities to bid out some of our businesses to be inclusive in some of the opportunities where we can go and find minority or in small women-owned businesses that are local, that are in our communities. We use those businesses to compete. It helps us because we are also giving back to the communities we serve, because they could be customers, they could be our neighbors, they could be our, employees, family, whatever. But it also helps them grow their business by providing contract and access to capital to them too as well. So that's one of the measurements. There's several others, but that's one measurement that we use to make sure that we're providing some DEI opportunities for some of our businesses.
Got
And
it.
notice I said not just minority businesses, but women-owned businesses too. So
Right.
if you're a small woman-owned or a small minority-owned business, you don't have to just be minority-owned. You could also be a woman-owned businesses. It's still those underserved businesses that we're trying to do business with.
Mhm. Right. And I know your work spans several industries and organizations
Mhm.
across your 27 years. How have these different experiences influenced your approach to DEI, and how have you kind of adapt to different organization cultures with your strategies?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Kara, because that's what it is. So I've worked in DEI in some capacity through higher ed, K-12, retail, banking, my own consulting firm. And there's always the strongest tie to DEI for any of those organizations has been making sure that those efforts align with what the business objectives are for those companies. So, for example, when I worked in higher ed, okay, making sure that our business objectives align to what the federal government gives us money to do, gave us money to do. I don't work there anymore, but the student population, the graduation rate, the procurement opportunities, it all has to align with what the organizational business objectives are. And then you can start moving from there. So once you align what your DEI objectives should be with your business objectives, then you have the business case. You have the business case of why DEI is important. And it does vary from organization to organization. So when I worked at Walmart, it varied from when I worked at Arvest Bank. When I worked at Arvest Bank, it varies from what I worked for with Southern Bancorp. So it does, I have seen it play out based on what the business objectives are of the organization.
Got it. Can you give some specific examples? For example, I know at Walmart you've developed the Inclusive Leadership Initiative.
Uh-huh.
Is that a way you kind of aligned the values to the business case?
Sure, absolutely. So at Walmart, my role was to create a learning and development lens to the leaders. And so we came in and I created this program around unconscious bias, around training and educating all the associates on what unconscious bias looked like in the workplace and what unconscious bias could look like to me. Like, how do I identify my blind spots and and identify my biases? It's a human behavior. It's a mind thing. We all got biases. That's the good thing about identifying biases is we all have them. It's just whether you tend to mitigate biases, good bias or bad bias. And then how do you then strategize and interrupt the biases? And so when I created the learning and development program around unconscious bias for leaders, it was definitely to align all the associates, all the employees with customer base, because customers for Walmart are so diverse. You get them all different types of people who are customers, but then also how do you make sure that you mitigate those biases with your coworkers, with your colleagues, with your leadership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. I'll cut that whole part out when we
Good,
both
good,
talk.
good.
Um, Okay.
No, I got you. You know, I'm over here going.
Yeah, I totally feel you. Like, take your time when you need it. Um, Looking ahead, what are some emerging trends or areas of focus in DEI that you believe will become increasingly important in the next 5 to 10 years? As I know it's been very pivotal in those like few years when there's a lot of political attacks on this concept, and before in 2020 when we finally there was a push for this concept. So what do you think will be the trend in the next 5 to 10 years, and how is Southern Bancorp preparing for those changes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I get futuristic questions, it's always because it's changed. So, in 2020, I had an idea where we would be in DEI today, and definitely it hasn't been. So, but going forward, I think there will be a bigger push on equity, on the fairness of equity, on defining equality and equity. Equity is the ultimate outcome for any person that works in DEI because we realize there are some systemic challenges that come along with that. And so, how do we dispel and mitigate some of the risks around systemic challenges that came way before us? And so, I think going forward, equity is going to be at its utmost importance because, again, equity is about making things work for me as I need them, not giving everybody a level playing field, but there will be some people who have an advantage over others. So how do we make sure that the playing field remains equal, and or how do we make sure that I get the same opportunity as someone else? So I think going forward at Southern Bancorp and anybody else that's in the DE&I space, we'll be really focused on the ultimate outcome, which is creating fair and even and level set playing fields for everybody, not just particularly for those that are marginalized, but for everybody. How do we make sure that everybody's being treated fairly?
Right. I love that perspective and answer because I've asked a few people in the interviews, and that was one answer I would remember.
Yeah, yeah. Equity is what we're all fighting for. I
Right.
mean, representation is pretty much there because diversity is easy. You can
Mm-hmm.
you can pretty much count if you give somebody a checklist and say check all the ways that you're diverse, you'll get a whole lot, right? Inclusion is a little more hard to manage because usually that comes from behavioral changes. And so
Right.
you have to ask people how they feel in order to be included. Like, do you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you're part of the conversation? Do you feel like you're part, perspective? Equity is that thing that says it's a little more harder to measure and a little more harder to recognize because if you're all given a seat at the table, right, that says, okay, it's equal. Everybody gets equality. But I may need a red marker because I could be colorblind and I can only see red. So in order to fully be engaged in the dialogue and able to take notes, you may have to give me a red marker where you've given everybody else a red one. I mean, a black one. I saw an illustration not too long ago, Kara, that was really good. It talked about um, everybody getting a pair of shoes. That's equality. Equity says the pair of shoes, but equity says you get the pair of shoes that fits you.
Right.
So sure enough, everybody gets the pair of shoes, but if everybody may not
Mhm.
be a size 11.
Yeah.
So how do I get the pair of shoes that work for me? Um,
Right.
so
And what advice would you give to emerging leaders or organizations just beginning their journey in DEI? with this whole battle and, you know?
Let's go back. I would first start back. If you are new in the DEI space, I would make sure you identify what your business case is. Again, identify what your objectives are for your business, and then somehow tie your DEI objectives around the same thing. If you are in a business to service people, then make sure the people that you serve are diverse, right? So make sure that the people that will be servicing those people are too diverse. That would be first. Second, I would probably say, don't rush it. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Anything DEI has taken time because, to be honest, nobody's doing it completely right, or else we wouldn't have it. So to measure success is kind of hard because there's not anybody really to measure it against, because nobody's really doing it all the way correct. So do it the way that it works for you, and share best practices. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel around DEI. It's a bunch of DEI folks out here that are doing it pretty good, not completely all the way, right? But pretty good, where you can go and say, hey, I'd like to share some best practices or benchmark some of the things that you're doing that's tend to be working for you. So you don't have to recreate the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Just tap along and tap into somebody who already is doing it similar to you, and share best practices, and build your network, create you some resources that may or may not be in your same industry. So one of the things that I've learned too is, just because I'm in banking in a CDFI doesn't mean that my resources and network has to be in banking too. Sometimes it's good to get outside perspectives and then apply it to where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you expand your network and your resources to be able to share best practices and benchmark.
Right.
Yeah. And then don't be too hard on yourself. It's an ever moving target. And DEI is one of those things that has some qualitative measurements to it and some quantitative measurements to it. So don't be too hard on yourself when one outweighs the other. It's all about continuing to respect multiple perspectives, valuing differences, realizing that there are groups of still marginalized people that are part of some systemic issues that we're all starting to see, and it's all coming out and we're starting to solve. So don't be too hard on yourself. It may look like it's failure, but one step is better than no steps.
Right. So how did you stay inspired and motivated in your work with, you know, recently the ODI office was disbanded. There was a lot
Mhm.
of loss and hopes. And as you said, there's a lot of quantitative measurements and qualitative measurements that that can't really be taken into account of. So how did you stay inspired in your journey?
Oh my God, Carrie, it's tough. Who's to say I'm still inspired? I'm just kidding. Um, um, okay, so for me personally, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and it's so important for me to demonstrate to her how different people are, but how we have a lot in common too.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach her the aspect of respect and respecting regardless. Not saying you have to change who you are. I tell her that all the time. You don't have to change who you are to assimilate or to fit in. Be your authentic self. And when you do that, it allows for you to be more included and belong. And even if you are excluded, you still have to find a purpose for you. So back to that, when you see it, you can be it. I try to demonstrate to her how she can be it, not me. She would never be in DEI. She's like, I would never, it's too emotional. She was like, I would never, but she does understand. And I give her the opportunity to see different things and see different people and experience different people and get different perspectives in order for her to be open-minded and continually to be curious. Professionally, I've come so far. It's like I got to see it to the end. I've been doing this fight for a long time. This struggle has been a long time coming. And so the competitive nature in me makes me go, I got to see it to the end. Like, I got to, let me just, one more accomplishment, one more accomplishment. And it's not even a personal accomplishment. I love the accolades, Kara. Don't get me wrong. I love being named top 50 women chief diversity officers. I love that. But I also love, I had a phone call yesterday with a young lady who says to me, thank you. I never would have looked at it this way had you not shown me that this. So that inspires me when people tell me how I've said something, I've led a conversation, I've given my opinion about something, and they took my perspective and applied it to themselves. That kind of motivates me too. So personal and professional motivation.
I love your whole, because not a lot of people can go this long way. It's really inspirational.
Listen, there are some days, I'll be honest, completely honest with you. Here comes the vulnerable LaTricia. Um, After George Floyd, I wanted to give it up. I don't want to do this work anymore. It's too hard. Um,
Mhm.
I said, and I've been doing it and I've been doing it well. And it's my passion and my purpose. I know I'm driven by this purpose. I just wanted to give it up. I was like, it's just too hard for me to do. And then tapping into something else, I decided, no, I'm not done yet. Like there's a little bit more left in me to continue to try to help people understand that it's okay to be different. It's okay to have, different experiences and share different things. So um, it is hard. This is actually my 30th year being in the field.
Wow.
I
That
know
takes
I know I
so
don't look.
much guts.
Yeah, it
You
does.
look
It,
you
it
look
does.
really young, by the
Thank
way.
you. Thank you. I am young. I am young. It does take courage. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of risk taking, a lot of friends and enemies, right? I've made both.
Hmm.
But I am authentic, what I believe, and I hope that I demonstrate it when I talk about it. I'm really passionate about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I through this like podcast, that's why because I started with my friends not knowing what DI was
Mhm.
and or them knowing the concept but not really understanding the concept. And so I'm also in my school's newspaper and so we would discuss about it, but when this concept came up, most people who are often on the news because we're all a newspaper, right? But we
Mhm.
don't really understand. My peers didn't really understand what this concept means. And after I've done a few like digging into DEI, I was like, let me start something for people
Yeah.
my age, which is like around your daughter's age, because I'm also 16. And I was
Yeah.
like, let's see what we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, man, if I'd have known about this, about DEI work back then, I shared a little bit of my story with you. My senior year of high school, I was the Black class president. We had a white class president.
Oh.
We had a Black prom. We had a white prom. We had to raise money to put on our prom. The school donated funds for them. And this was in 1992. So
Mm.
just over 30 years ago. And so I didn't realize at that time how divisive and segregated things were because it was just a part of what we knew. I didn't realize that, looking back, it was like, oh my God, we really were segregated.
Yeah.
Um, and so had I known then, it's interesting. It's funny. When I went back to my 30-year class reunion a few years ago, everybody was like, we knew you were going to be the person because I didn't realize that I was advocating for the underdog to be everybody to be included, even then. But now
Mm.
it's like we knew DEI, it wasn't called DEI 30 years ago, but we knew that's what you would do. So kudos to you and your colleagues and your peers for starting the conversation now.
Wow. Your
Kudos.
spirit really, it's the guts you have,
I told you it's yeah.
really inspirational. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It gets tougher, but hopefully Maybe it'll get easier soon. We'll
And
see.
that concludes today's episode on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before we sign off, thank you for listening to Don't Erase My Identity. Stay tuned for next week's episode.